Hello, everyone. Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic DFS channel. Today, we're talking some best ball tiers. We're going to be talking some quarterbacks that are a bit overvalued according to our tier rankings. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so when this and all other content goes live. We are also giving you all of this away for free. That's our best ball package, includes rankings, tier breakdowns for every position. There's strategy articles for each individual site, DraftKings, Underdog, Drafters. We have it all. So make sure to check that out. The links will be in the description below. And now to get into the tiers, we're talking some players that are overvalued according to our rankings. And all of the ADPs we will be using are Underdog specific. You can find the DraftKings and Drafters ADPs on our site. The degree to which these players are overvalued or undervalued will depend on your platform. So just take that with a grain of salt as we get into these. Overvalued. Brock Purdy, ADP, currently sits at 113.7. He is the quarterback 14 in our rankings. So this actually isn't a massive gap for us. And it's one that makes me a little nervous because of how good Brock Purdy was last year. I mean, he's literally setting records for yards per attempt at 9.9 per game. And I mean, you could make the case that San Francisco improved their weapons with the addition of Ricky Pearsall in the first round. They also were, Brock Purdy himself was 8th in fantasy points per game. That was while just going over 300 yards on 5 occasions, which is a bit surprising. Really good players around him, especially the skill position players. The offensive line is a slight concern. They have Trent Williams, but then PFF ranked them 24th with players like John Feliciano, Jake Brendo, Aaron Banks, and Colton McKivitz rounding out the unit. All these guys were on the team last year, so, Purdy putting up his crazy season in a run-first offense, maybe it's not as bad as places like PFF rank. But the real issue I have here is you just have players that possess more upside in this range. And I think players on teams that just aren't going to be quite as run-heavy. For example, right behind him, you have Tua Tagovailoa in the ranks. We have Trevor Lawrence right ahead of him, who was on a crazy pass-first offense. And that's without even considering players like Kirk Cousins who enter new situations. Atlanta hires Zach Robinson as offensive coordinator. They're going to pass the ball incessantly. So it's not even so much about Purdy. It's around the players around him. And the last thing I'll say on this, Brock Purdy, he's very easy to stack with the pass catchers on his team. You run into a very familiar build if you stack Purdy, which you should be considering if you're playing best ball. Look up our stacking articles. We'll have them below. Basically, what happens is you have Christian McCaffrey at an ADP of 1. He's the number 1 overall pick. The draft loops back around. The players that draft number 1 overall are sitting in a spot where you can get Debo or Ayuk. You can get both sometimes. And that leads you to a very familiar, easy stack with Brock Purdy, who's quite simple just to tack on in the mid-rounds. So the build you run into is a little worrisome to me as well. As far as stack ownership goes, this one should be more of the higher owned stacks because Purdy offers nothing on the ground. He's highly attainable with the players and where they go in drafts. Stacks like the Ravens, for example, they're a little harder to complete than the 49ers stack, which makes it a little wearisome in my opinion. Going to our second overvalued quarterback. These are some later guys, but players that I think are coming in overvalued in the ranks. Jared Goff, ADP of 127.5. He's QB 20 in our ranks. We have him behind a slew of players that we just named. Now, he's being drafted in a range where he's at his absolute ceiling. Detroit has been able to coax out some awesome play for him. If you look at most recently what he's done in a run-first offense, he finished 7th best in yards per attempt, 7.7 last year that was adjusted. But the problem is he still was only 15th in fantasy points per game. He had 5 games with 300 yards or more. The receiving unit is worse. They lost Josh Reynolds. In his place, they're going to rely on Jamison Williams as the wide receiver too. A lot of people are holding a candle for Jamison Williams this season, but he's been absolutely downright horrific in his first 2 seasons, despite being a first-round pick. There are some excuses people will make. He's had suspension for gambling, and he came off an ACL in his rookie season. I'm not sure if he's good. All I know is the Detroit Lions are making an enormous bet on their former first-round pick alongside Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta, and they have absolutely nothing behind him. This team also vastly exceeded expectations, going 12-5 last year. Their win total this year's 10.5. They made a ton of improvements on the defense. They ended up being sort of a shootout team at the end of last year because they couldn't defend anybody, coaxing Goff into a little bit more of a pass from the offense than what Detroit typically wants to play under Dan Campbell. All this to say, there's a lot of paths. The offense, his inability to run, a historic, I guess, level of play that's not on tier with players like Stafford, Kirk Cousins, Justin Herbert, Tua Tagovailoa in the same range. A lot of downside for a player before you even consider the 10.5 win total. They have just as good of a chance of finishing below that as they do above. A lot of people may argue they were 12-5 last year. What's stopping them this year? An accurate win total of 10.5, where they're just as likely to go under, is the most likely to trip him up. Last one, I struggle to even say he's overvalued, but because he's going so late, but he truly is, and it's Derek Carr. His ADP is 200.6. He's QB 28 in our rankings. I could make the case you could put him even lower behind players like Russell Wilson and whatnot. But Derek Carr, he has a long, long history of being a below average quarterback. They did make some changes to the offense, hired Clint Kubiak as offensive coordinator to try and fix Derek Carr. But his most recent coaching experiences with the 49ers, I wouldn't expect this to be a revolutionary offense in terms of the amount they throw. Carr was 14th in adjusted yards per game, but he was 29th in fantasy points per game. And that's the real problem with Derek Carr. Job security is pretty good, likely to play a ton of games, but you have absolutely no upside. How many usable weeks does he actually give you? And if he's giving you usable weeks, that likely means you had an injury to your QB1, which is not something that's going to win you best ball. So to me, also, they added nothing around him. Chris Olave, A.T. Perry, and Rashid Shaheed, that's who they charted out last year. That's who they'll chart out again. And I didn't even bring up Taysom Hill, who's also going to victimize Derek Carr perpetually around the end zone, where he comes in and takes all of the rushing production that Carr maybe would have with quarterback sneaks. This team is projected to be below average at 7.5 wins. Again, just as likely to finish below that as they are above. This is a disastrous situation for Derek Carr with almost no upside whatsoever. I would rather spend a flyer on just about any quarterback in this range. Russell Wilson's better if he plays 16 games. Bryce Young, second-year player with some upside. Drake May, Bo Nix, J.J. McCarthy might not start the whole year, but when they do, they give you more upside just because they're unknown over Derek Carr. And even players like Will Levis, second-year players, I'm willing to bet on them over a player like Derek Carr, who's never shown upside in his career. That'll do it for us on the quarterback tiers, the overvalued version. If you would like to check these out, they're available for free. They update every Thursday along with our rankings. All that is free this year. So check them out. We'll have content on all the positions, running back, receiver, tight end. And let us know what you want in the comment section. If there's something you want to see, I'll do my best to get it out there. Until next time, good luck, everybody. We'll see you guys later.